I didn't cry when I packed my bag. That surprised me. I stood in the middle of the bedroom I'd lived in for 41 years and thought, what do I take? Not what do I leave? What do I take? Because leaving it all was easy. None of it felt like mine anymore. Not really. The house had been Michael's on paper for 11 years. He just didn't know that yet. I put in 2 sweaters, warm socks, the photo from my nursing school graduation, the only one where I look like I know exactly who I am, and an old tin box with a latch that sticks. Michael had never asked about that box. In 40 years, he had never once asked. I always told myself that was fine. Children don't need to know everything. I believed that for a very long time. Michael stood in the doorway and looked at the floor. He's done that since he was 9 years old. Stands there, goes quiet, waits for someone else to say the thing that needs saying. When he was little, that someone was me. Then for a while it was his wife, Karen. Then me again, from a distance, on Sunday evenings when he'd call because something was sitting heavy on him and he couldn't name it. Now he stood in the doorway and I folded a sweater, and we were both quiet, and neither of us knew how to stop it. Mom, it's a really nice place, he said finally. I went and saw it myself. The room has a window that looks out over a garden. I nodded. I believed he went. I even believed there was a garden. I was just thinking about the tin box and about how 20 years is a very long time to carry something without knowing what to do with it. I was a nurse for 40 years. People think that's a job that teaches you about death, and it does a little. But mostly it teaches you about presence, how to sit with someone when things are at their worst. Not fix it, not explain it, not leave, just stay. I learned that at the bedside. At home with my own son. Somehow I could never apply it. Danny left when Michael was 8. That was his father's name, Danny. He was charming and restless, and I loved him in the way you love someone who makes everything feel slightly dangerous. One morning he said he needed space to figure things out, and he left, and the figuring out apparently led him to a woman in Cincinnati, because 3 months later I got a letter, 2 pages, careful handwriting, explaining that he was sorry, that he hadn't meant for it to go this way, that he hoped Michael would understand someday. I read that letter at the kitchen table while Michael slept in the next room. Then I folded it and put it in the tin box and told Michael in the morning that Daddy had to go away for work, and it was complicated. He was 8. He looked at me with those serious eyes he had even then and said, "Is he coming back?" And I said, "I don't know, baby." And that was the last time we talked about it directly for the next 40 years. I told myself I was protecting him, and I was, partly. An 8-year-old doesn't need to understand adult failure, but an 18-year-old might. A 25-year-old certainly does, and I kept finding reasons to wait. He's too young. He's in the middle of school. He just got married. Karen just had the baby. There's never a good time to hand someone a thing that might break something in them. So I kept carrying it. And somewhere along the way, the carrying became the habit, and the habit became the silence, and the silence became so familiar, I stopped questioning it. What I didn't understand, not until much later, not until a small room in a place that smelled like institutional cleaner and somebody else's laundry, is that the silence wasn't only protecting Michael, it was protecting me from having to be present for whatever came after, from having to sit with him in the middle of the thing I'd kept from him, from having to be seen as someone who had made a choice, right or wrong, and lived with it for 40 years. Please stay with me until the end and subscribe to the channel if these words are landing somewhere true for you. Every week there are stories like this one here about what we carry quietly and what happens when we finally set it down. Michael brought up the assisted living facility on a Tuesday evening in October. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd read Danny's letter all those years ago, and he had a folder. He's an engineer, there's always a folder. And he walked me through 3 options: ratings, proximity, cost, amenities. He'd done his homework. I looked at the folder and thought, he doesn't see me. He sees a problem he loves that needs to be solved. He wasn't wrong that I needed more help. My knees had gotten bad. I'd had 1 fall already. I was slower in ways I couldn't argue with. But that's not why he made the folder. He made the folder because that's how I taught him to love. Through organizing, through solving, through doing the thing correctly. I never taught him to sit across from someone and ask, "Mom, what's actually going on with you? How are you really?" Because I didn't know how to do that myself. I'd been moving since Danny left, and I never quite stopped. When Michael finished his presentation, I said, "Okay, when do you want me to go?" He looked at me with that expression I know, part relief, part something that looked like shame, part surprise that there was no scene. And I thought about the tin box and thought, maybe it's time. The room was small but clean. It smelled the way places smell when all the objects belong to no one in particular. I put my 2 sweaters in the drawer, set the nursing school photo on the nightstand, and put the tin box on the small table by the window. Sat on the bed, looked out. The garden was real. October, leaves coming down, a wooden bench with wet leaves on it. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Not sadness, not bitterness, a strange flatness, like I'd been holding something in tensed arms for a very long time, and someone had finally said, "You can put that down now." I thought, I have done everything I knew how to do. The question is whether he knows that, and whether it's too late to change it. My neighbor across the hall was a woman named Cecile, retired school teacher from Georgia, sharp and funny in the way that Southern women of a certain age are sharp and funny, which is to say completely and without apology. She asked me on the second evening at dinner, "You have children?" I said, "Yes, 1 son." She said, "Does he know you? Really know you?" I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I don't think I made that easy for him." Cecile looked at me and said, "Honey, that is the most honest thing I have heard anyone say in this building in 6 months. That night I took the tin box off the table and opened it. The letter was still there. Danny's letter, the one from 20 years after he left, the one he sent when Michael was in his 30s. That one I hadn't mentioned. The first letter, the one from when Michael was 8, that one I could explain. But Danny had written again, 20 years later, from somewhere in Arizona, saying he'd thought about Michael every day, saying he knew he had no right to ask for anything, saying that if Michael ever wanted to know him, there was a phone number. I had never told Michael that letter existed. I sat with it for a long time. Cecile knocked on my door around 9 o'clock, and I was still sitting there. She came in and sat down, and I handed her the letter without saying anything, and she read it and handed it back and said, "How long have you had this?" 20 years, I said. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, "What were you waiting for?" I didn't have an answer. I think I was waiting to know whether it would hurt him more to know or not to know. And the waiting had become so long that the question had stopped being about Michael and started being about me, about whether I could survive being present for the answer. Michael came on Sunday. He brought coffee, the good kind. He remembered how I take it, and that always catches me because it means somewhere underneath the folder and the engineering and the organized love, he actually sees me. We sat by the window and talked about nothing for a while. The weather, his kids, whether the garden got enough sun. Then I said, "Michael, I need to give you something I've held on to for too long." I put the tin box on the table between us, opened it, took out both letters, the one from when he was 8 and the one from 20 years later, laid them side by side. He looked at them, at his father's handwriting on the envelopes, at the dates. "What is this, Mom?" "Letters from your father. Both of them. The first one came the year he left. The second one came when you were 34. He wanted you to know him. I never gave you the chance to decide whether you wanted that." He was quiet for a long time. He picked up the second envelope and turned it over in his hands, the way people handle things they're not sure are real. Then he looked at me, not with anger, though I would have understood anger, with something that looked like grief and recognition at the same time. "Why?" he said. Just that one word. I told him the truth, that I thought I was protecting him, that I convinced myself there was never a right time, that somewhere along the way, protecting him had become protecting myself, from having to sit in the room with him while he felt the thing I'd kept from him, that I had spent 40 years being present for strangers in hospital beds and somehow never learned to be present for my own son in the ways that cost me something. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Can I read them here, with you here?" I said yes. He read both letters twice. He cried, quietly, the way men cry when they've spent a lifetime learning not to. I sat across from him and I didn't fix it, didn't explain it further, didn't fill the silence, just stayed. The thing I'd learned at bedsides for 40 years, the thing I'd never managed to do at home. After a while he looked up and said, "I want to know who you were before you were my mom." That was the question I had waited for, without knowing I was waiting for it. For 70 years I had been a function, his mother, Danny's wife, the nurse, the one who held things together. And here was my son, 62 years old with reading glasses and gray at his temples, asking who I was. We talked for almost 3 hours. I told him about growing up in Kentucky, about wanting to be a doctor and not having the money, about Danny before everything went wrong, about what it felt like to be 29 years old and alone with an 8-year-old and a tin box full of letters. He listened in a way he'd never listened before, not waiting for information he could act on, just listening, just there. Cecile said afterward, "You see, sometimes they have to take you out of the house before you remember to bring the important things with you." I laughed, really laughed, from somewhere deep. I don't know how much time I have left. 91 years old. That's not an age for illusions about time. But I know this much. The hardest work I did in my life wasn't 40 years of nursing through night shifts and short staffing and patients who didn't make it. It wasn't raising a son alone through everything that came after Danny left. It wasn't carrying that tin box for 4 decades without knowing what to do with it. The hardest work was learning. Finally, in a small room with a garden window, in a place that smelled like nobody's home, to stay, to not fix, not explain, not protect, to just be there while my son felt something hard, and let him feel it without trying to make it smaller. It took me 91 years and 1 tin box, and a neighbor named Cecile who asked the right question at the right time. Don't wait that long. If this story touched something real in you, subscribe to the channel. Every week there are conversations like this one about what we carry in silence and what happens when we finally lay it down on the table between us.